and obviously that's just angered and irritated by the simplest and smallest things is an important factor. But I guess let me just specify. I don't want to take up too much time because I know you want to go through questions, but
That's what they're here for.
I do want to say this. I'm actually a little bit kind of like I know we talked earlier about being an expert, and there's no greater expertise than lived life experience. And I don't know why I feel they need to say this to you, because I feel like based on our conversation, you kind of hold the professional up to a certain level. And let me just say that what we learn in school and what we learn in practice a lot of times is simulation for real life experience. And so I would say there's probably no greater expertise than you. And so your experience is very important. It's important to us. So I'm sorry to take. I apologize. I don't. I just want you to know that. All right. Social avoidance, social withdrawal is probably the biggest, most pronounced factor with suicide. I'm sorry if my voice is a little wavery. It's like I've gotten a little bit emotional now hearing the story, and I don't want to. I want to. You've done a very good job of keeping things kind of light, so I don't want to take away from that. So excuse my wavery, nervous voice. Social withdrawal is a big deal, and it's easy for teenagers and young children to kind of pull within themselves. And children that tend to be more naturally like introspective, the ones that tend to ruminate and think about things over and over without speaking it, tend to naturally fall in those traps of social avoidance and social withdrawal. And the social withdrawal only pulls them further away from the emotional stability of others that can pull them out of that kind of emotional situation. And so it's very important that you pay attention to the withdrawal. The other thing too is recognizing that if there's a how can I put this? There's a lack of interest. I'm speaking a lot of depressive symptoms, and there's obviously a high correlation between depressive disorders and suicidality. And another key marker is there seems to be a lack of interest in the things that normally are engaging. Now, I will say this, a hard part to tease out is with kids nowadays, they play video games. And there seems to be no lack of interest in video games. That doesn't seem to change. That seems to be pretty stable. So let's not use video games as the marker, but recognizing that if it's a child that normally enjoys, let's say, going to the park, or enjoys riding their bike, or enjoys dinner time with family, and it seems that they seem to lack interest in those areas, another very important factor to pay attention to. And the flip side of that is what you'll see is children or teenagers will, or really anyone that is at that point, will start to give things away. And part of the component of that is the lack of interest. I know sometimes people think that, and part of this is true, sometimes people think that it's the giving away of, I want to give a piece of myself before I go. Yeah, that's a part of it. Part of it is actually the lack of interest in those objects anymore, not being tethered to parts of life. So I would, for me personally, my experience, those two components seem to be pretty substantial.
No, sounds good. Let me follow up with this question here. How can parents differentiate between typical teenage mood swings and more concerning behavioral changes that would indicate a risk of suicide? Either or.
Okay. Wow. I think that begins with, as from the parent's perspective, you knowing your child, and that means you have to be intentional about checking in with them, seeing how they're doing and stuff like that. Because to Dr. Carter's point, it's easy for teenagers, especially adolescents, to withdraw and just kind of, go into their own little space and stuff like that. And, they don't want to be bothered. They're on their phones or whatever else, And so as a parent, you have to be intentional about knowing kind of what's going on with your child, because what's going to happen is if not, then it's going to be hard to kind of distinguish, okay, what's normal behavior from other behavior that's very concerning, And so that's kind of my take on that, And so you got to be locked into your, And so and I know I will say this, and my wife and I are on this street. We have two teenagers in the house, 16 and one about to be 15, and it's easy, they get in their rooms and they got the door closed and they're talking to their friends on their iPad, on their phone, whatever it is that they're doing, or making TikTok videos, all that good stuff. And, it really, you as a parent, you have to be intentional of going in there. Like, I go in the room and hey, what's going on, and even if you ask them, say, how's about their day, and they say, oh, it was fine, you as a parent have to take that further. You can't just be like, oh, they said fine, that's okay, that's cool, if you really want to know what's going on. So like, and they'll tell you, like, my daughter's here, she's in the back, she's kind of smiling. I said, and we're having these conversations, we have them in the car going home or whatever the case may be, like, so what does fine mean? What does that, whatever, and then you kind of get an idea, about what's going on in their life. And that helps you tune in to those things that's happening, so that when you see behavior that's unlike them, then you can say, hey, kind of like, what's going on, with that, so that's my take on that.
Try your
I 100% agree with everything that you are saying. You do need to be in tune with what they like, what they don't like. I mean, because if you don't know their norms, then you don't really know when they're falling out of their norms. Digging deeper, knowing their friends, kind of knowing the stories, which then helps when you're having conversations, because it's not like, how was your date? Like a checklist. You're like, oh, how'd you do on that test? Or, did Johnny, make the team? Because you're already involved. So yes. And I think that helps for a child who displays typical suicidal behavior. I will say with Jalen, it's been really difficult for us because he doesn't follow, and this isn't me being, what's the word when you're like, no, just like, it's like when you put up walls like, oh, that wasn't my kid, in denial, okay? That's not the term, but yes, okay. If that's not me being in denial, or because when I tell you, I went back to the beginning, I had God walk me through, like, what did I miss? There are also, I go back and I think, he said this. I wish I could go back and like probe that more. But I will also say, we can only know what they tell us. So what you're saying is correct. You want to have that relationship, which I did. I 100%. I'm being very, very honest. I did. I can say, with God as my witness, I did not leave a stone unturned in parenting. I didn't do everything correct. But I can stand before God knowing that I absolutely did my best. I didn't sit on the couch and just let life pass me by. I was a very active parent. So I just want to say that if I could go back, I wish, I mean, I would have, I literally would have bet our whole entire life savings, my house, my dog, my parents, I would have put it all on there that this would not have been our story, like 100%. Most parents, I think, do, but you can look at some families and be like, I promise you that wasn't our story. Supposed to be. So if I could go back, I wouldn't be afraid of the word suicide. I wouldn't be afraid of it. I know now that talking about it is not putting that idea in my son's mind. Okay? It's shedding light in a really dark corner. And I believe this to be true, that suicide rates are higher, right? Especially in this new generation. Gen Z tends to be more prone to it. Okay, so I think then we as parents need to be proactive about that. Like, why? What's happening? What is going on? I mean, when I was growing up, kids or adults that committed suicide were into drugs, were sexually abused, were like major things were happening in their lives, like catastrophic things. It's not the kid who comes from a family that is loved, prayed over, like adored, like literally adored, right? That didn't happen. And it's happening now, and I wish that I knew that. I wish that I was not afraid to talk about it, because now, past, like his friends would say, oh, Jalen sent me this TikTok, like super random, and it had something to do with somebody committing suicide. When I tell you, like, Jalen was not suicidal, but that was there, right? That was, I think because a year before Jalen passed away, our nephew passed away the same way. And we didn't, I mean, I gathered everyone around. We did our pinky promise. Like, we're never doing that to each other. We're never doing that to each other. And, Jalen paused a second, and I looked at him and I said, what are you doing? Get your finger in here. This is a pact. We're not doing this to each other. I didn't take the second to like, hey, why are you pausing? And didn't realize, now since losing Jalen, the thoughts come in, right? And I didn't talk to him about it. It was just like, we're not going to do that to each other. Boom, that's it, and not really saying, hey, it's going to be normal for you to now be thinking about this, because now this is part of our reality. This is part of our story. Like, I wish that we had addressed that more, unpacked it, and just not been afraid of the word suicide, or thinking that me talking about it was going to make him like, oh, like romanticize it, is what I'm trying to say. And that's what I was afraid of. If we kept talking about it, that I in their mind, that I might be romanticizing it. And I wish I knew that wasn't the case. If I could go back, I wish I could change that. But again, I want to say, we only know what they'll tell us. If they truly, and it took a nurse telling me that, because I just, you beat yourself up. What did I miss? What did I miss? I just kept like kept saying that, God, what did I miss? What did I miss? And it was a coworker that worked up on mental health, and she sat me down, put her hand on my leg, and she said, if he didn't want you to know, you would never know. Just like I don't know what you're thinking. And that just took a weight off that I needed off my shoulders.
Um, um, well, first of all, yeah, no, you guys hold that. Oh, just hold it. We'll get to it. Testing. First of all, yeah, babe, I want you to know that not only do I not feel this way, but I know that other people. Yeah, it's not. No, you don't have to defend yourself. Okay, you are the most awesome mom in the whole world, and you dedicated your entire life in raising my family, and yeah, you don't have to ever defend yourself. Okay? And nobody's thinking that. I want to tell you that. You guys are talking about verbal. It leads me to this next question. Verbal cues. I titled this question "Verbal and Nonverbal Cues." And I want to open this up to you guys, and then I think we'll jump a little bit to the floor and then come back to some things. Because at the end of the day, we want to answer your questions. At the end of the day, we want to answer your questions. But are there any specific words or phrases that parents should be listening for that may suggest suicidal ideation? Are there any nonverbal cues or behaviors that might also be significant?
Not well. I don't. Let's just say not in isolation. I think you have to be careful about statements or behaviors in isolation. There's outside of self-harming behaviors, and even self-harming behaviors aren't necessarily indicative of suicidality. And I just want to say this is where it gets complicated because and this is I want to say that sometimes giving tools or ideas can be a detriment in the sense that you're asking questions and you may not know the follow-up questions to ask with it. I've been trained for however many years, and there's still times in which I'm asking questions and I don't know the next question then to ask. And I'll be honest with you, it can be a fairly dangerous game once you head down that path of questioning. And so I don't want to give too much that is going to be a potential problem for anyone in the future, outside of recognizing that if there's a concern, and I would say that can be any type of concern, it could be a gut feeling. I can't verbalize why I feel this way or why I'm concerned. Find a professional that can do the professional work and the professional assessment with that person, rather than questioning and saying like, well, I've asked all these questions and they checked out. They checked all the boxes. Fortunately, it doesn't work that way. As far as verbal and nonverbal cues, like I said, the self-harming is always concerning. The discussion about death and dying, again, are important conversations that we shouldn't avoid. Like you said, it's like these are real life factors, and more so now than they were like 50, 60 years ago. And recognizing that we are kind of in a different place. The other thing too is recognizing that, especially when we're talking about young kids and certain generation, like we're talking about Generation Z, and I don't know what comes after Generation Z. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what comes next after Z. The alphabet ends. And so when we're talking about this younger generation, you have to understand that they have a difference in language. They speak things like Riz. I don't know if anybody knows what Riz is, but this is how kids, and this has always been the case. Guess what? They can say verbally something that you just don't know, and unless you're kind of studying the lingo, you're going to be kind of in the dark. Saying that, if there's a conversation about death, just be involved in the conversation about death. Be open to it. And recognizing that doesn't mean that that person or that child wants to die. It's curiosity, and it's asking questions about, like, well, what does this mean? Like what is it about death right now that's important to you? Like, why is this coming up at this point in your life? So it's kind of just being present with that individual at that time. So.
Testing. So what we're gonna do, guys, is in terms of the mics, when we're gonna give you each a mic, and then when you're not using it, just turn it off, and then flip it on when you want to use it. Okay. They're gonna bring the other one back up here. Okay, but we're gonna open up any questions on the floor. If you get a mic, great, you can use it. Okay, we do have some mics that are gonna walk around, but family, if you have any questions, now's the time to ask your question. Please stand and raise your hand, and they'll bring a mic to you. Yeah, right here.
Thank you. So I'm coming from the perspective of being a professional. I'm a counselor, and I work with kids who have been traumatized. So I know a lot of the questions you guys were answering is from the parental perspective of what to look for. But kind of taking it from the professional side with kids who I see once a week, they have a lot of these symptoms because they have been through so much things. How do I guess, speak to the parents who are not believing or just not active in their life? They're not, or, they may be at a foster's home. They don't have a family unit. How, from the professional side, as a counselor, what else can I do to support them?
Can you tell me again, are you like a school counselor or?
No, so I work at a children's advocacy center. Okay. So I work with kids and their non-offending caregivers.
Okay. Yeah, that's a tough one when you have, when you're coming across a kid, you don't see them a lot and stuff like that, but there's no, how would I say, there's no support. Thank you. There's no support in there. I mean, I would say, if as a professional, as much as you can to be, of support to that child in whatever capacity, you see them in, and checking in with them, especially if you only see them once a week. And I remember when I was in the school system, one of the things that we would do, we had a list of kids that were, they were kind of more high risk type kids. And then we had them split up, and we kind of like each had kind of caseloads, so to speak. And we would do check-ins with them, just check in with them just every day or just whenever, just to see them, just to how you doing, how things are going. Because one of the things that I learned over the years is that one of the more positive things is if you have a child that has a supportive, positive relationship with an adult outside of their parents, and so that if something is going on and say they're in a household that really they don't have that support, they have someone, a trusted person they can go to and, share those things. So that's what I would say, just be that support as often as you can see them. Just check in with them, make sure that they're good as much as possible.
We didn't talk about this in class. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Being the support, kind of like a supplementary support to the parent. I mean, obviously, there's only so much you can do as far as the parents, like how they present. And so, is if your question is also about like how do I lean into the parents a little bit more about the seriousness of the situation, I would say I would take a presumed nobility type stance that I know as a parent that you want the safety of your child is priority. And as a professional, I have some concerns, and these are the concerns. And I understand that you may not want these to be true. You may not want these to be true. But this is what we have. And so presuming that I know that you want what's best puts them in the starting point at the right place. I hope that kind of digs into your question.
Got a question over there? Nice and loud.
Hello, hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Married to a pastor, so I know how to talk loud. Thank you for sharing your stories, by the way.
Why you gotta take a shot at the pastor, huh? The pastor has been working all day on
Chaplain
Sabbath,
Anthony.
and then we gotta get him too, huh?
But thank you for sharing your stories. On my end, when I was listening to what you were saying, like my dad took his life when I was 8. So suicide was a topic that we grew up with. But it wasn't in a healthy way. It was more like I developed this strong fear and I became super hyper focused. Like, this is not going to happen to my kids. And I've been a parent that in my quest to be protected, I was an unhealthy protective parent where everything was a sign. Like, why are you crying? Why are you sad? What are you doing? Don't open. So I have learned, I grew up with my first child. He says that, like, oh man, the younger one's got the good parent. I got the hard parent. But that's because I was growing up with him. But to what I really want to ask is, how, after your experience as parents, have you not allowed that fear to consume the rest of your family, and not just become so hyper vigilant that you maybe even damage your relationship by trying to prevent it from happening again?
That's a great question. I would say we're still in the early stages of everything, so I wouldn't say that we have it down great. I will say we all got counseling immediately. And then I think because this happened, it removed, like, this. Now, I have spoken to some other parents, and I'm not gonna like give light into what I think is worse, but for me, this was like the worst thing that could ever happen, right? So it's almost, I am a very fearful person, so I understand 100% where you're coming from. I mean, my mom always called me a worrywart. I just like, I would lay in bed and think, if someone broke into my house in this door, like, I had escape routes for every situation that could possibly happen that never happened.
And we're married and you're thinking like this.
And then, yeah.
The protector's with you, but you're thinking like this.
Correct. Yeah, like, I called him one time from the gas station because, I grew up with a dad who definitely took care of me, babied me. I called him and I was like, hey, I'm at the gas station. I'm on E. And he's like, okay, pump the gas. And this was here in Cleburne. I was like, you want me to get out and pump gas? It was nighttime. He was like, the light's on, right? well, yeah, but you're not, I remember sitting in my car so angry thinking my dad would be so mad at him right now that I'm having to pump gas in my car at 10 o'clock at night in Cleburne. So definitely very much a worry, always worst case scenario happening in my mind. So I understand it, but this relieved. I mean, truly, it was just like, this is the worst thing that could have happened. All right. So now we're not afraid to talk about it, and I will say, my oldest son, he's a little bit older. He's a pastor. He has a little bit of training from being a pastor, and worked at a school. So he has really good awareness of his thoughts, his feelings, what it looks like. Our youngest daughter definitely struggled with specifically suicidal thoughts and what to do with those now that they're a reality for our family. Like, it's not just sad, it's like you go there because that's happened. So again, that's why I wish I wasn't so afraid of it before, that we could talk about it in a way where, do you have these thoughts? And I'm not mad when she's responding, because that's my reaction to fear, is anger. Like, what you're feeling, well, that'll shut her down right away. So it's like, okay, I think that's totally normal. Like, your brother went through this, like you're dealing with this. So yeah, you're going to think about it. And then and I'm not mad. So then I'm asking, are you really wanting to end your life, or are you just hurting right now? Like, do you want to be done? Or are you just want the pain to go away? And those are two different conversations.
Any other questions? Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me read a little bit. I like your hat. From different point of view, sometimes I talk to my wife. She's a mental health supervisor too, with kids. We sometimes would not agree in some point of abuse, but always this been in my mind as a pastor family, as leaders, spiritual leaders, as a church organization. I think we're still missing some points of, I'm gonna say probably a reference to our pastoral leaders, because they seen this coming some often. Like not even a month ago, happened on University of Los Antilles, Pastor Efrain Velasquez. So as a members of a church, and you're talking about it's kind of general, but as a pastors, how can we help the pastoral family? Because I grew up in a Spanish family church, and let me tell you, it's hard because we labels the sons of daughters of pastors. And there is an extra pressure of them because whichever thing that they do, they focus on them. So I think that's add something extra for pastoral families. So, and my question is directly to both of you. There is some research that has been focused on those spiritual leaders, families, and churches that are to help them, how to support those little ones growing up. When pastors are leader of a spiritual church, and then we label them. So it's I think it's an extra adding too much to them. I grew up with friends that are their dads are pastors, and they joke sometimes when they said, "Oh, dad's gonna preach, and I'm gonna bring my pillow." But it's the way that they want to take off the pressure because they're focused on them. if they go to play soccer and they said something or kick someone, no, it's a pastor's son. So I think in this case, particular, when they're suffering on the situations, there's something that we can do as a church members or as a conference or union or Seventh-day Adventist organization to help pastors, family of pastors, to guide them or to do something. You guys think that there's something that we can do?
Yeah.
And of course, it's going to help us. But in this specific is for leader or spiritual leaders.
Yeah. So let me see if I'm understanding your question. Is there something? You're a pastor, right, Pastor? No. Okay. You're asking the question: Is there something that pastors can do to help navigate this? Is that what you're asking?
Not directly to the pastors, but to the organization of the Seventh-day Adventists to help our pastors.
Okay. Is there something that the conference, the North American division, the union can help support the pastor in navigating suicide?
Correct. That's more specific.
Yeah.
But
And the pastor's families.
Pastor family.
Got you.
I guess I want to clarify too, as far as pastor's family, is it, because you use the term label, that there's kind of like it seems like an underlying label that comes with being a pastor's child, a pastor's kid, kind of that whole thing? Okay. I think I understand where your question, without getting myself kicked out of the church.
You can't get kicked out. You're an alumnus of Southwestern Adventist University. So
It's been so long, you don't know. So let me say this. I understand where you're going as far as the label, specifically with suicidality, kind of that whole picture, and let's just say successful suicide, more specifically. That there's obviously a label within the church about that lends itself to a no conversation. I don't know what church a lot of you guys grew up in. The church I grew up in, if you committed suicide, you were going to hell. And I can't tell you how many times the story of Judas would be told with that. And so with that, as an overarching narrative in the church, guess why kids don't want to talk about it? And we have another question, so I'm gonna leave it at that. I think the narrative of how we talk about suicide and death by suicide within the church probably needs to be different.
yeah, and I think the pastors, we just have to make that a part of the resources that the conferences and the unions put out in supporting pastors, is therapists and counselors and just supporting the families. I think the initiatives, being able to bring in professionals who can, because at the end of the day, right, even if the pastor wants to support his church, the best thing a pastor can do is just bring in an expert, try it out a few times, tweak, and do it again, and do it all the time, bringing in people who can speak on the subject and give actionable steps for their church. And in the same way, they'll be supporting their own family in these conversations that they'll have. I'm going to jump over here to that question, but, I'm going to piggyback on what you said there. After my brother had lost his son, it was a year before my son, and we were at his funeral. And as we were eating, and we had just buried my nephew Ryan, my mom, Jalen actually came to me. My son Jalen, he came to me. He said, Dad, Grandma's asking what happened to Ryan. And my mom would be 80-ish this year. Yeah, she'd be 80-ish. She passed away, but what happened to Ryan? And what had happened in that situation is nobody had told her how Ryan had passed away. And because everyone is speaking in English and avoiding Grandma on that subject, Grandma just knew, even up to that point, she only had known that he passed, but she didn't know how he had passed. And we just buried him that day. So when my son, Jalen, came to me and asked me that question, I knew that we needed to give my mother an answer. Again, my mom and dad, my dad would be 105. Like, my parents are older, okay? If he was still alive today, he'd be about 105. And so I knew that what you had mentioned was sort of how they grew up, which was that if you committed, if you had taken your life, suicide, heaven was lost to you forever, right? And so I remember then going up to my brother on the day that he buried his son, and I didn't want to have this conversation with him, but I said to him, I said, hey, bro, I'm so sorry to have to ask you this question, but Mom is asking how Ryan passed away. Do you want me to tell her? Or, you don't need to tell her. I mean, in fact, I can go tell her myself. You've got a lot on your plate. And he says, no. Let's get everybody together and I'll tell Mom. And so we sat there at a table after everything had sort of settled down in the reception after his funeral. And my brother began to tell the story, not just coming right out and say it, but sort of leading up to it. And when he got to the part where Ryan shot himself and had taken his own life, my mom stopped and said to me, please take me to my room. Right there. So I escorted her to her room, and for 3 days, she would not come out of that room. And every day, multiple times a day, I would go to her room. I said, Mom, she hadn't eaten. I brought food, left it there. She would not touch her food. And she laid there on the bed with a sheet over her head. It was, and she just laid there with the sheet over her head. That's how she sleeps. That's how I sleep. So I knew that she was either closing her eyes or she was just, and I would touch her leg and I would massage her leg. And by day 3, I said, Mom, get up. Mom, eat some food. Mom, and she just wouldn't answer. I said, Mom, will you talk to me? She would not have a discussion or anything. And on the 3rd day, we had to leave. And we were driving from Montana all the way back to Kansas City. I took the kids in there to say goodbye to her. And I said, Mom, we're getting ready to leave. She wouldn't move. I mean, she moved, but I could tell she was still breathing and everything, but she just wouldn't move. And I just said goodbye to her. I kissed her on her feet and kissed her through the blanket. Everyone did. And we walked out. And as I was headed out the door, she flipped the blanket over her head. And she says, will Ryan go to heaven? So I turned around and I came back in and I sat by her bed and I began to give my mother a Bible study on how, man looks on the outside, God looks on the inside, and how my father, who had been in the military, Marines, for 27 years, and he had been in World War II, Vietnam and Korea, and all of the trauma that he had experienced in that as a husband and as a father coming out of those wars, that Mom, we know more now than we did then, and that this is not true. And that I promise you that we will see Ryan again, and that God is the perfect judge. And that that's not true, that theology that you grew up on, Mama, is not true. I told her the story of Samson and how he had passed away in his last ditch effort and taking everyone along with him, the Philistines, and in that building. And I said, and then here we are in scripture that he's in the hall of faith. I said, Mama, that's hope for all of us. And so 3 weeks later, my mom passed away of a broken heart. Any other questions? Yep. We got one back there. Yep, back there.
Yes. One, I want to commend you and your wife for being able
Could you speak up, please?
I want to commend you and your wife for being able to speak in this setting after losing your nephew and your son so recently. And I consider myself blessed to be able to be a part of this session. But as a parent, one of the things, and growing up with the Gen Zers, you do have TikTok and you have all of these different social media sites that are starting trends. And a lot of those trends are doing suicidal things and teaching you how to kill yourself and teaching you how to do crazy things online. And I think it's really important for the panel to maybe address or maybe talk to what can parents do to monitor their kids on these social media websites such as TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
That's a good question. I guess the first thing I want to say is that I want to affirm all the parents in here, the people who have raised kids, in the process of raising kids in whatever capacity. Parenting is probably the hardest job that anyone will do. And none of us are perfect at it. None of us, we have our good days and we have our bad days, and we do the best that we can. So we definitely want to, I want to affirm you in here as parents. Social media, that's a new thing. It's, and it's one of those things where, as a parent, you want to get in tune with what's going on. And so it's one of those things, like for us personally, for our kids, they're on social media, but we are too as parents. And we can see what they're doing, and we check their phones and different things as much as we can. It's but we also have had, I would say, conversations with our kids in that, like, hey, if you see something that concerns you, we want you to know you can come talk to us about that, and do it in from a non-judgmental type of way. Like, hey, you're not going to get in trouble if you come to me or come to mom and you're wondering about this, or you saw something that really, bothered you, wherever the case may be. And we want you to know that we're here to talk to you about whatever, even just to listen to, and so it's important. And I know, and I say that just because, especially if you're not a real, techie type of person and stuff like that or whatever, it's really hard, to kind of, I'm going to make an account and get on there. Like, my wife definitely has more social media accounts than I do. I think I just have Facebook. I think that's about it. And that's probably one of the oldest ones, but yeah, she has everything. She has a TikTok, Snapchat, and all that good stuff. But, as a parent, you just have to, as much as you can, you'll have this. That's an area, just be honest with you, you're going to have to navigate now. It's just part of the deal. You have to navigate that, and you have to, and also too, just also understanding the age, kind of what you're dealing with, what's more age appropriate and stuff like that, whatever. I know kids are getting social media at a younger age now. So, and then really tailor your conversation to the needs and kind of where your kid is at a time. So, but that's something we're just gonna have to navigate it in. You know, you can't really know what's going on unless you're like on there kind of seeing, and you're checking, you know, as much as possible, you know, to do that. So that's what I would say.
I would say throw your cell phones away, turn off your internet, get rid of all of it. No, I'm saying that in partial truth, as far as look, it's the question that was earlier about overprotection, and we have to accept the fact that we're older and we do not live in our kids' world and what will be our kids' world. And so you better believe social media will be your kids' world. Who's going to be better at it? They're going to be better at it than you are. And being completely avoidant and not allowing them to use it and be aware of it and know it and be educated is potentially more problematic than allowing them to have it. Having said that, it's not the suicide rate with this, well, 10 to 24, more specifically the 9 to 14 being the second leading cause of death, almost so exactly correlates with let's just say the movement of information in social media. As social media becomes a more pronounced aspect of our lives, the suicide rate has commensurately grown with it at a remarkable rate. And we could literally look at the data and look at when the iPhone came out and when people started to have Wi-Fi, or not Wi-Fi, goodness, see, I'm showing my age. They had internet access on their phone. They had data, sorry. You look at when cell phones had data and look at the jump in suicide rate at that exact moment. I want to say it's like 2010, 2012. It's not, there's no other way to explain it. There's absolutely no other way to explain it. Look, there's plenty of theories about why that is, like what's going on. I personally think that there's some obvious factor to it of living in assimilation. And I'm not trying to go conspiracy theory or talk about the Matrix. I promise I'm not going to go there. But there is some truth to not living in reality and the falsehoods that come with social media. I think everybody's going to have to figure it out. We're too early in to know what to do, how to address it with our kids. The most important thing is to be aware, have conversations about it, know what they're on. The age-appropriate thing is exactly dead on. I had my 7-year-old was on YouTube, and some of the videos that pop on YouTube are kind of like, oh man, I didn't even know this was allowed on YouTube. And so it's like, you've got to be aware of what's age appropriate and just educate yourself on those platforms. But again, just be aware that your children will be better at it than you will.
Yeah. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I don't think that we can, we could sit here and talk to you about just what they're saying. I am reiterating, your kids are different than anyone else's kids. You as parents know them the best, but just really, really basic, you both touched on it a little bit, is the sleeping. And I know looking back, I know this was a factor for Jalen. It runs in our family of having problems sleeping. It's so important. I've gone down the rabbit hole. So if you read lack of sleep and suicide rates are huge as well. So tying this all together and having your phone at night, allowing them to have their phones at night as they're laying in bed scrolling or whatever to help put them to sleep, right? I do it as an adult. I've made myself stop because I do believe this affects. So I'm not telling you what rules to put out because you've got to figure out for your own family what that would be. But I definitely think don't allow them to have it at night in their rooms. I think it ties in with sleeping. I think it ties in with very vulnerable time. Also, the things that, like you're talking about, the matrix stuff is different at night than it is in the day. I just think it's very dangerous.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me just jump on that, and then we have a question over here. But what I would say is, you talked about social media and how do I decipher this? And I think what they're touching on is that it's very difficult too. But one thing I would encourage you to do is that rather than trying to, talk about this information and that information and this platform and that platform, I think the best thing that you can do as a parent, right, is instead of talking about the counterfeit, talk about the truths, right? Talk about what the actual truth is. And when you focus on that, that this is bad for you and that this is bad for you and that lack of sleep and needing exercise and when you talk about that, they will be able to decipher because they cannot not live on media of sorts, right? Eventually, that's what they use in school, and even our filters can only do so much even in our school system. So helping them to giving them the tools to make good decisions and openly talking about, are you feeling safe? Do you feel like hurting yourself? And then taking the proper steps to combat that. I think that would be it. Okay, we're jumping over here. Got a question?
Well, just to, I grew up in that kind of church that he was referring to. Very, very conservative. I mean, I felt that I was more Catholic than Adventist when I was growing up. But 40 years ago, when we came to Keene, and I had participated in a prayer group with Morris Venden, Pastor Morris Venden, and that changed my life completely, because I understood what righteousness by faith is, and not, my finger pointing to everyone, but what they're doing wrong. And that changed, with my kids, because they were little. And my wife, God bless her, she was dad and mom because I was traveling most of the time. But the time that I had with them, we had that relationship. And the church is really very little what they can do to help pastors, because, the legal part in this country, it's very difficult. So we cannot blame our leaders for that, because it's a very, very, very hard topic. But and I lost a brother through suicide, so I understand. Because I couldn't find any better parents than you guys, So I went through that. And the day my brother died, he was always the happiest person in the family. When we had family reunions, he was doing the show, because he was always a very outgoing person. So it was a surprise for us. And the day that he died, we learned about the discussion they had in the family, and he went home mad and committed suicide. And I was going to call him, but the wife said, don't call him, because he's mad. And I wish I called him. But, that's why keeping the dialogue. Our careers are sometimes more important than the family. We don't have time for our kids. The dialogue is so important.
Yeah.
And that's my question is how we can keep that dialogue going. Because you do that, and you did that. But in what kind of talking points we need to have with our kids so it doesn't happen?
Yeah, how do you, well, and I guess you're meaning more broadly rather than specifically about suicide, but just how do you keep a dialogue with your family or with your kids? I guess let me say this. Not to go back to the social media part. The reason why I say that, so the other part of social media being so dangerous is because let's just say it's a dopamine hit when people use it, and especially when kids use it. And when I say the difference between living in a simulation and living in reality is reality at times is not so fun, right? And so it's a little bit harder to get dopamine. It's hard to get a dopamine fix in real life compared to on your phone. And conversations take work and effort, and it's not as fun as a conversation. I don't know how long a tweet can be. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know how long a tweet can be, but the tweet is a lot different than having a full conversation in which I've got to sit face to face with someone. And so I think that's a part of it, is how do we keep the dialogue going, is having what we can call dead zone times of we're going to turn the devices off and have conversation. And it will get better as time goes on, as far as like we just need to engage in what are your interests. Let me get to know you a little bit better. To give a little more context to that, and realizing that from a child's perspective, they don't necessarily know what questions to ask. It took me until I was probably about, 40, before I realized that I didn't know who my parents were. They just existed. I knew them because they took care of me, and they were the ones that made me who I was. But as far as like, who are you? I don't know. Like, I really don't know. And I think there's simple things from a kid's side that it's like they don't know what to ask. And as the adult, as the parent, now having this perspective, it's kind of like, hey, let me share some stories with you. You know what it reminds me of? Like, before there was television, before there was telephones, at one time people would tell stories about their family in previous generations. And I can't tell you, I've never met any family that does that talks about their family history. Something as simple as that, as a dialogue, it helps you become engaged with your family structure and your history. It connects you with something. But something as simple as that, it's like having a topic that, we're going to spend time talking about our family history, or I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me. So I don't know. That's just an idea.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate that. We've got another question over here. Go ahead.
So I'm going to give a question, but I'm going to leave with a statement. I know it's been talked about a little bit of, what tools are out there for pastors moving forward. I just want to throw a tool out there, a resource, which is clinical pastoral education. This is an opportunity for many ministers, and even those who are not in ministry, to be able to basically take their faith and see where the rubber meets the road. To be able to have some self-awareness as to what life really looks like, because many times I believe our belief system can get in the way of what life really looks like. And I really appreciate, Mark, what the story you shared when you had to speak to your mother and give her what the Bible really says about certain topics. Before CPE, I can be honest with you, I was a little afraid to have certain topics. I'm fearless now because I realize life happens. It happens, whether we want it to happen or not. But with that said, there are, I think, as a parent, many times I've been afraid of one of my kids to like me. And many times I stop and I go, you know what? I'd rather my kids like me than for me to have those hard conversations, right? And so I remember there was a time where my oldest completely, I don't want to say lost his mind, but he completely had an entire fit in his room. He was in there bleepity, 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 just getting at it. My wife was like, oh no, stop it. We've got to go in there and get him. Now prior, I'd have been like, oh, hold on, we got to go in there and we don't talk that way. But I realized with experience and awareness with myself that I can stop and say, he's praying to God. He's having a prayer with God in language I probably wouldn't normally use, but he's praying in the only way he knows how to get it out. For those who are dealing with potential or could be, what resources, because I realize we can ask questions, but what resources can we use beyond this point to educate ourselves on our own awareness, our own way of communicating with children or those around us that we love, to be able to have those conversations fearlessly, knowing that however we grew up, whatever our parents passed down to us, when life happens, we've got to deal with it. Is there any tools or books, anything of that sort that we can say, you know what, let me go and gather these things so that we can deal with those we love the most?
I can start off and answer that question for you. One of the, and I'm a former educator and pastor, and when I went on this journey of speaking in public places all over the world, I just immersed myself in information. And then I looked out there and I came across this certification. Others refer to it as mental health first aid. But the one that I was looking at similarly, it's called QPR. QPR is like CPR for suicide prevention. And so now, again, I'm in school and I'm doing what I'm doing, but one of the things I tell administrators and educators and parents is that I know somebody who can come in and certify you. It's a 1-hour certification on QPR. And what it is it helps you identify the warning signs and help you question, persuade, right, and refer this individual to a professional. And that's what it is. Just like CPR is like, we get them stabilized and we do CPR and we call 911 because we're going to get them to the professional. So you don't have to be the professional, although you can read. No one's preventing you from reading as much as you can on information. And we could give you books and we could recommend, which they will, but all you got to do is hit Google and hit Amazon, and books will come out. But that's one that I can speak on with like just in high regard is QPR. It's just like CPR. Everyone should be CPR certified. Everyone should be QPR certified. It's a 1-hour certification, and I do offer that. I would love to pour into your family, your organization, or whatever that is. But that's another way to help answer your question. I want to bounce over here if anybody else wants to answer. You don't have to. We've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, I would just say, as far as if we're specific with suicidality, the CDC gives really good statistics and information. So the CDC.gov. There's NIMH. No, National Institute of Mental Health is a really good resource. Has statistics, has like just basic information, has books that you can read.
And we will have that slide.
Yeah.
If anybody's up there that can hear me, you can go to that resource slide. We have a slide that's going to give everything that you had said.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to read it, screenshot that, and take a picture of it.
Yeah, and I would say this, there's a lot of resources. It's more figuring out what specifically is going to work and be helpful for your particular situation. So yeah, any of these that are there, the NIMH is definitely tons of resources. SAMHSA is a really good resource. It also has a component of substance use. So yeah, please definitely go to those websites and you'll find all you can. You'll spend days reading. Let's just say that. So.
Anybody else? Microphone? Got a question? Yep, go ahead.
I'm a retired pastor, and my children went to school with Mark and Mindy at Thunderbird Academy. And I want to speak. I don't have a question so much. I just want to speak to the other pastors in the congregation here and their wives.
Speak up, Pastor.
Okay.
Clear.
Yes, I'm getting old. So if you think you've done everything perfectly, especially PKs, I'm talking to pastors and their wives, you can never do too much. We live in a really bad world. We live in a place where bad things happen. And I thought we'd protected our own children, Matt, who you're very good friends with, I thought we'd protected my children, Matt and Mandy. And one day when they were still in high school, and afternoon we had people over to the house, and I was telling the other people, I said, my wife and I have been really intentional making sure our kids don't feel like PKs. We try to do everything we can think of. My son happened to be walking down the stairs and he heard our conversation. And Matt says, "Oh, it affects me. It affects me." So no matter what you think, you do, especially pastors and families, the challenges of today are incredible. If you pastored 70 years ago, I've even had pastors say, "Man, it was fun being a pastor. Hardly any family problems." Today, so just encourage you, stay close to the Lord and your children close to the Lord as best you can. But even then, and maybe I'll just say one thing, is my son's wife, Lisette, I remember her 20 years ago saying to me, if I was to pattern my parenting skills after somebody, it'd be Mark and Mindy. So I just want you to know, we just live in a bad world. And thankfully, we have the promise of the resurrection. And Jesus is coming quickly. And I'm saying, Lord Jesus, please come quickly.
Yes, we'll still answer some questions, but I'm going to jump onto this question. Can you move the slide back one on that, please? But I'm going to ask the panel this question. If a child, is that the next one? The one that says you can call or text 988. But here's the question that I'm going to ask you. If a child does disclose suicidal thoughts, how should parents respond, right? In a supportive and helpful manner.
Excuse me. Yeah, if your child discloses that information, the first thing that you should do is affirm them and say, "Hey, thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you. I'm so sorry. That you're dealing with this. I want you to know that you're not alone, and we're gonna go through this together." The last thing you want to do is, "Why are you feeling like that?" And then, you just don't want to go there. You want to go ahead and you were just affirm them, because that took a lot. It took a lot. And tell them and just say, "Hey, I know that probably wasn't easy for you, but I want to thank you for sharing that with me." And so, as a parent or a trusted adult, whatever capacity you're in, that's how I would approach that.
Love that. Thank you. Yeah, I love that. Any other thoughts?
I would just say making sure that you also, like, if necessary, seek professional help for them. So any local hospital, if you take any child, any age to any local emergency room, they will do an assessment there if it's necessary. So.
It's not a punishment.
So if my child comes to me and says, "I want to kill myself, I want to hurt myself," yes, affirm them. Then the next steps would be what?
Well, it's having I would say having a conversation with them, like kind of continuing that conversation. And you kind of have to get an idea of whether it's like, okay, is this just something that is significant? And I guess that's hard to kind of like specify, like what's significant, what's not significant. But go back to if my gut feeling is like, I don't feel safe, I don't feel that I can keep my child safe, or there's some real concerns here. And like she said, it's not a punishment for us to go to the emergency room. So similar, like if you have any other accident, you break an arm, you break a leg, and it's like, we just go to the ER for them to check it out and just understand it better, right? And with time, it heals.
Let me jump in, Dave. So if they're feeling like they come to you now, you've affirmed them, and you're trying to discern, so I will jump in because you're saying then they would go to the, take them to the ER, you could take them to the clinic. But the other thing that I would say, just to encompass that, is that I would take it all of it serious. If they say to you that they want to hurt themselves, we are in, that's it. That's your line. We're gonna act, and we're gonna take them in.
Yeah.
And we're gonna text, or we need to call, or whatever, we have those resources. I would say that you don't need to discern too much. Take them in, okay? That's the great part about it, is you can never be too safe, right? And one of the things that I will just speak on, is that if I could go back, I would just take you anyways, and I would have the conversation anyways, and I wouldn't be afraid of offending you. I would not be afraid of bringing it up, and I would just ask you and talk about it, and that's what I would say. You don't need to actually discern. Go. There are professionals who will do the discerning for you. They will, and they can begin the path of healing, is what I would say. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
What would you say to parents who may be concerned about the next steps if they have a child or a teen who is expressing suicidal thoughts? I know in our extended family we've had a young person who did that, and the results with mandatory admission to inpatient units and some of those things were not favorable experiences. Especially from a Christian worldview, there were things that were competing with what, I won't go into all the details, but some really scary things that happened there. And I know that's not every kid's experience, but I'm just curious if you could speak to that for a moment, because I think that's a lingering concern in some parents' mind, and obviously the other concern would be that they would not take action and hold off too long, so I'm not minimizing the legitimate concern and the need to take action. But what would you say to parents who have heard stories or had experiences of extended family who have been in those situations where it backfired or it turned ugly, for lack of a better phrase?
Yeah, that's a that's a tough question. I'll be straightforward with you, and I've worked inpatient psychiatry for a very long time.
Straightforward is good.
You want me to be straightforward?
Yeah, straightforward is good. That's what they came for.
Yes, it's true. There are some issues at inpatient psychiatric facilities. I think if the risk is there, it's obviously the benefit greatly outweighs the risk. I would say research where you're taking your child. I know I'm kind of contradicting myself. I just said that take your child to the just closest emergency room, but know where you want your child to go. There's a big difference between one psychiatric hospital and another. And so if you want to look up online, Google search particular facilities, I can tell you that there are some that have really good care, and there's other ones that not so much. And so that's really the best difference that I can say.
And I think the devil, he doesn't want us to get help. He wants what happened to Jalen to happen to your kid. So I think you don't give up. Like he said, please research. It's real quick on Google. They make it so easy now, just quickly. And then pray about it and move forward. And then if this wasn't a good fit, I'm so sorry, son. I'm so sorry. Let's try a different place, because there is real help out there, and we're going to get that for you. We're going to get it for you. It may take a little bit, and that's okay. We're going to do it. And just because it wasn't perfect, you don't teach them to just stop, because that's dangerous.
Yeah, thank you, baby. Yeah. Doctor?
I'm just curious because I hear especially Christians, sometimes get very concerned about medication. So I would just like to hear from the professionals a little discussion about the role of medication in treatment. And
Well, I mean, I would say again, it's a cost benefit thing, and that's commonly how the psychiatrist weighs whether I should give medication for this or not. So let's take like ADHD I know it's not the same, but ADHD medication is one of those questions of, well, if the benefit is that they will perform well in school and learn, then that greatly outweighs some of the other potential side effects like loss of weight, loss of appetite, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like the side effects, they have to weigh the two. The other thing with psychotropics is yeah, there's some psychotropics, specifically SSRIs, that are pretty concerning. I mean, there's SSRIs in which some of the side effects include suicidal thoughts. And so it's kind of like, well, I came to treat that, so why am I giving my child something that is causing it? And so I would say, do the research. There's plenty of stuff online as far as information about the particular medications. Don't just accept what the psychiatrist is prescribing. They tend to start off with low dosage and work their way up. And let me specify this too. I'm not a psychiatrist, so this is really kind of loose information about medication. That's not my field, but generally speaking, it's doing the research, asking a lot of questions, and also recognizing that this doesn't have to be a permanent treatment plan. And let me say this, it's definitely not an exclusive treatment plan. It is the lesser of the treatment that we give behaviorally. Therapy is the primary focus, the primary goal. Psychotropics is really just a opportunity to get that child to a starting point, which therapy can be helpful. And so it's recognizing it's temporary. Let's get them stabilized, and then quickly keep the psychiatrist on top of when can we start to kind of take them off the medication or lower the medication.
And then let me just comment on that. Yeah, and so one of the things that, is that I would say to parents is that, be someone who got on medication as we navigated the loss of our boy. I was hospitalized. I'm the kind who never takes Advil for headaches and that kind of thing, and just sleep it off or go run or whatever the case. Like, that was me. And I just clearly remember being in a place of helplessness. And I actually say to you that, yes, you should pray. Pray hard. Get close to God as you drive yourself to the hospital and get help. And that includes taking medicine. That includes getting therapy and immediate counseling. And there's a term that they say in there, do the work. Because it's going to take work, And here's disclaimer: you don't have to take what we say as the end all be all. We're starting the conversation. We're having the conversation, but do your due diligence. I want to throw this piece in there, and then we're going to go to another question. But here, and then we only have about 12 minutes left, okay? And then we'll be here to hang out, and people have to go to sleep and stuff. So, but we're here to hang around and talk, and I want to be respectful of my therapist and professionals' time, and so anyhow. But one thing I would say is that we have a saying in education: if you can predict it, prevent it. And so if you can predict that these are things that your kid or your child, your grandchild will go through eventually or at some point on some high level, middle level, or low level, the thing that I would do is I would research the resources in your area. Where would I take my kid if there was an emergency place? Research, find the right place. The second thing I would say, especially if you got early on, normalize counseling. Don't wait for the tragedy and the disaster to hit your family. Don't wait for your marriage to fall apart before you do that. Normalize talking to, as we say, a professional. And when you model that for your children, we will break the cycle of destigmatizing, but break the cycle of counseling and therapy and talking about these things and seeking professionals like these gentlemen to talk to, right? Okay, there we go.
I have a family member that during a birthday party, all she would talk about was death. And the major depression and mania symptoms just keep escalating. How do you help someone that doesn't realize she needs help?
Great question. How do you help someone that doesn't realize they need help? I think there's the perspective of your child and then the perspective of someone that may be a student of yours or somebody that may be a family member of yours.
Well, I think it goes back to an earlier point about, for one, you can't, there's really no forcing, that it's ultimately up to the individual, especially depending on what age we're talking about, but it's up to the individual as far as whether they want to actively participate, unless there's a couple of concerns for safety, let's just say. If there's a concern for safety, like we're talking about with suicide, then we can kind of take a process to involuntarily have a person treated. But generally speaking, if we're not talking about that, we're talking about someone who has some underlying difficulties. She's talking about death, but not necessarily suicide. It can be very difficult if we're talking about somebody with like bipolar disorder, because there's a level of separation from, let's just say, what we consider reality and kind of like realistic expectation and kind of realistic behaviors. And so it makes it extremely difficult to bring that person back to a place in which it's understanding that you're not safe, you're not where you're supposed to be, like you do need help. And the thing is look, there's nothing more potent than the relationship. If you have a strong relationship with that person, I have found that people that are in full-fledged psychosis and completely broken from reality will still find a person that they've had a relationship with and will listen to a person that they've had a relationship with and they can trust. And so again, I know this isn't giving you like what do I say, what do I do? It's kind of like you've got to have the relationship with them to build trust and to be able to kind of broach that conversation and say, I just don't think that you're doing that well. I know for you it seems like things are going great, but here's what I see. And like, will you be willing to kind of take this first step and let someone else give you some information? Again, like a professional give you some advice on what to do or how things look. So yeah, I would just say that it's got to be the person that they're connected with, that they trust and have a relationship with as a starting point to have that conversation.
Question? Yep.
So as a psychiatric practitioner, I wanted to reiterate what Mindy said. In the same way as when you go to a facility, not all facilities are the same. Psychiatrists and people who prescribe medication, it's about relationship and it's about who you feel comfortable talking to and saying. And from a practitioner point of view, never, ever, ever is medication prescribed without counseling and therapy. The patient, part of their plan of care is always going to be counseling and therapy. You don't always have to continue taking medication, but you should continue therapy and counseling. That is part of the plan of care. So like they said, medication isn't always a permanent thing. It can be temporary, but also from the perspective is, would we ask a diabetic not to take their insulin if it's what allows them to function? There's a distinct difference between addiction and medication that's treatment-based. But I did have a question because we had a close member of our group, our friends, their child did end their life, unfortunately, too soon. And they said to me, we found out after the fact, they said they were fine, but after talking to the family, the child had attempted a year or two before, but had not continued counseling and treatment, and the parents said, but they were fine. So how long should the parents have the conversation with their child? And are there specific signs to look for once they're receiving treatment, that it's okay to stop treatment? Or how do you figure that out as a parent who never wants to lose your child?
Well, let me say that treatment as a parent, it's not just a child in treatment, you're in treatment too as well. I'm going to say that from a way of, and I say that in a way of being aware of what the treatment plan entails, because, good therapy, there's a process as far as how you start winding down the process on, okay, we've seen this is our treatment plan, because the treatment plan is basically it's your roadmap. So, you have certain things that are outlined in the treatment plan, and as you are completing those goals, whatever the case may be, you get to those certain spots, and then you start to, if things are going pretty decently, you start to wind down into the process of where you start going through kind of almost like a discharge type of process. So it will be, just because you say, well, my kid's been doing therapy and we've been doing it for 2 months and, now they're good. That's not, it has to be the reason. Good has to line up with clinically kind of what's been happening, how have they been progressing through treatment and stuff like that? Are they achieving their treatment goals and things of that nature? And then from that, and like I say, everybody is different. And from that, then you can determine, how do we, wrap this up, or, how do we continue depending on how things are going? So that's what I would say. And also I'm going to throw this in just as a little, just speaking to all the working adults in here, or all the adults in here, or whatever. Most jobs offer EAP services. I don't know if you guys know what that is. And that's basically counseling services that are given to employees, and that's part of a lot of times that's part of your employment package. And if you're dealing with something in particular, stuff like that, I would say take advantage of that, because that's a good place to start. A lot of times they give you so many sessions, you have so many sessions that are free and stuff like that. You can take advantage of that. And I say that because my mother passed away in 2019, and I hit a really dark place, and I took advantage of the EAP that was available through my job at the time, and that really was really good for me to do that, and so I just say that, just to take the stigma out of getting mental health care and stuff like that. I know we're talking about, kids and suicide and stuff like that, but adults, we go through things too as well, and so to get back to what you were saying, also too, in the treatment process, continue to let your child know that we're in this together. Just continue to affirm that we're in this together. We're doing this together. I got your back. We're going, so they don't feel like they're just alone out there, just on the island doing that by themselves.
Thank you very much. We got time for one more question over here. Go ahead. You've got the last one.
It's more of a statement, if that's okay, Pastor. Been a pastor for 20 years. I was raised by a dad who, like perhaps some of us here may know, by a father who said, you're not allowed to cry as a boy, or to express emotions, vulnerability what is perceived as weakness. But there's a passage in Exodus where in chapter 3, God tells Moses that he's telling the people of Israel, go deliver them. And then he says this beautiful phrase, and he says, bring them back here. But my father didn't know what it was to be in an environment to share what he's going through. He wasn't raised in a culture where you can express your hurt, your pain, what you're wrestling with, what you're struggling with. So because he'd never himself been to that place before, he didn't know how to take me as a son in the process of dealing with these emotions. And the reason why I started that as I've been a pastor for 20 years is because there was 2 times in my life where suicide was attempted. One as recent as 4.5 years ago. And I'm here as a religion professor, as a pastor, telling you that pastors struggle with this as well. But there's not always a safe environment in our faith communities to allow for people to question, to share their frustrations and pains. And one of the best things, and I would say for us here, whether you are dealing with the struggles of life or not, is there's a beautiful biblical precedent of fathers and mothers saying, let me take you to the place where I've gone. So I started going to counseling at the age of 37 years old, 36 years old. I started going to counseling during COVID over the phone for 6 months because there was no in-person contact. And afterwards, I sat with my kids, especially my 2 older ones, and explained to them the journey that I had been on. And explained to them the results of me coming before the mountain of God through the voice of professionals who can speak truth to my life and hear me without any judgment, to hear my cries and my frustrations, my thoughts. That created an opportunity for me to be a Moses to my kids. To not just tell them the Lord's Prayer, to not just teach them the 3 angels' messages in the Sabbath, is to teach them that we have a God that is interested in every component of our existence. And I think if I were to frame a question, is what advice would you give to parents on how to begin a journey to that Moses experience, that mountain? What advice would you give to parents as a means of modeling? I know it's a little bit of a leading question. I apologize. You can frame it or answer how you like. But to model to our kids to say it's okay to not have an answer on how do you manage your own emotions and your own struggles and pains. Let me show you how to talk to somebody or go to someone. How would you approach that? And I'll end with that, Pastor Mark.
I think you just showed us. I think you literally just showed us the process of not having that model in your own experience and taking a step of faith to do it yourself. And then sharing that with your children, I really can't add anything to that. I would say that's exactly it.
So what would you say to a parent who's perhaps still struggling to do that then?
Gotcha. I think so this is where I go back to the stories of lived-in experiences is more powerful than the statistics that I can talk about or the research that I can talk about, that your experience is more powerful. And so it's hearing each other's stories and hearing what you said and how it had an effect on your family structure and how you were able to share is kind of the starting point. Well, now I can share that along the line to the next person. And so I think the starting point for the parent that's struggling needs to hear stories like yours. As far as from my side, is there something else that we can do to encourage them? I mean, yeah, it's taking stock of yourself. Like don't just live your life. Don't just take steps arbitrarily without thinking about how you feel and how things are going, because we do that. I mean, life can get pretty methodical, and guess what? Your brain likes that type of stuff. It likes to operate in sameness. And so then your parts of your brain shuts off and says, oh, I don't need to think about this anymore. But the unfortunate truth is that this whole underlying structure of stress and how our body reacts to it, that's still happening. And so I think telling people, take stock of how you feel, like how you're doing. Like, think about this, what are the struggles that you have going on right now? Think about what you've lost. Think about what you've gained. Think about what's changed. So thinking about those particular aspects of your life, and I know now the popular term is mindfulness. Everybody talks about mindfulness. It's good, yeah. Being mindful of like what's going on in my life. And from that point, then I can say, you know what? Maybe there are some things in here that I haven't really talked about, that I haven't really shared, and someone will be willing to listen to it.
I think the fear of not coming forward and talking to your kids should be that understanding that that does more damage than having the conversation. So, you know, as a parent, we never wake up and say, okay, I really want to screw my kid up today. You know, it's our goal is to always do the best that we can. So understanding that your fear of having a conversation, a real deep conversation with your kid that's worse. It's worse than any type of way you can stumble through an awkward conversation. That's better than sitting in silence and fearing and knowing that a conversation needs to happen. I don't really know how to do it. Just do it. Just do it.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel, can you give them a big hand? If there's any way we can play the
To go through this has been, I don't know how I'm still standing. I mean, it's through the love of God. And I believe that once this happens, for me, the realization, I grew up in the church 100%, my parents. So I know the devil's bad. I know he's mean. I didn't understand his hate for us. And I didn't see it until he took my son. He orchestrated this vulnerable time and then he just took it. And then he didn't stop. He just kept on attacking our family when we're just so broken, so low. And I think for me, I lived such a blessed, ideal life. I didn't, yes, you know the devil's bad. I didn't know. I just didn't know how much he hates us. And I hate him. I hate him. And I want what he did to Jalen. I want it to backfire. I want it to be how the Bible says. I remember when somebody sent me this verse and I was so angry because it says, that everything God will turn into goodness. And I just thought, no. Not one good thing will come out of this. I guarantee you, not one good thing will come out of this. But God has such a beautiful way, just a beautiful way. This was not God's plan, 100%. This was not God's plan for Jalen. Jalen was going to be a teacher. Jalen was going to touch your kids' lives. Kids are going to be in heaven because of my son. I know that. And the devil knew that, and the devil took him out. But the devil also has opened, or God has opened these doors for us, for people to just look. I promise you, there's a lot of you that don't know Jalen, but if you knew him, I don't know one person, and I know him as mom. So take it with a grain of salt, I guess, but I don't know one person that knew Jalen that didn't like Jalen. You may have been jealous of Jalen, but everyone loved Jalen. And we're going to see Jalen again. I know that. I also know that we are able to have conversations that maybe aren't the typical conversations about suicide, because Jalen didn't fit this mold. And I think that's becoming more of a reality now from what our ideal of a typical suicide person is. That's changed. And I think opening these doors, I know Jalen's peers have reached out and just been like, if Jalen did this, like I'm struggling. I didn't realize it. They understand more dangerous ground. They're getting help. They're seeking help. We're able now. We're strong enough. We stood up for nothing else except for this is the only way that I can fight the devil back. Is if you have this conversation with your son or your daughter and they turn. That's another one he didn't get. He failed. I just want him to fail.
Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for our panel.